we'll specify that more when we get a little closer to it. Okay, so campaign. It feels like there's all these campaigns going on all around us, and campaigns is not such a new topic to introduce because we've been referring to it all along, all through the course of the semester, and the kickoffs and peaks, the peak, which we seem to be kind of approaching now. What's the deal with campaigns? Why do you think that that is such a key concept in this work of organizing? I mean, because we've been saying that, and we've been using the concept, and we've been talking about, you've read about some campaigns, right? Last week, this week, and so forth. What do you think there is about it? Why is it such a core idea? Yeah.
It creates urgency that's needed to mobilize people.
And so urgency is critical for what piece?
For action.
For action, and what other piece?
Motivation.
I don't even see it in here. Yeah, the motivational piece, right? The action piece, the motivational piece. So one thing is that campaigns, because of the way they're structured with time limits and end dates, can create urgency, which then has a motivational benefit. What else? Yeah.
I think it gives people a clear way for how to get involved. Like formal structure, people understand, figure out where they can plug in.
What's the advantage? Why a campaign as opposed to enroll in our program? What's different?
Because I think that seeing the resolution, like knowing when the resolution is going to be, and
Okay.
seeing that sort of like, okay, there's going to be this peak and this event, and so you can kind of map a trajectory for where you're going. And I think for people to get involved, it's easier to get involved in something that has a resolution as opposed to just kind of open-ended, just come with us forever.
So there's a little more logic to it,
Yeah, logic.
because there's a purpose. And there's not only a purpose, but what else is there? An outcome, a purpose, and also an end date. I mean, can that be helpful?
Yeah.
How many people have like a sense of campaign in your projects that you're trying to enroll people in? Let me just see, because I know some do and some don't, and we're going to talk about that more in section about the difference between a campaign and a non-campaign and so forth. But okay, so there's this idea of a purpose. It creates urgency. There's an end date to it. What else? Yeah.
Also power, to demonstrate that there is a power, and I think power with, because you manage to get all those people together for a certain purpose.
Yeah.
It has to do with power.
So it makes like the collective visible. It makes people visible in some way because of the amassing of it. Okay, that's good. What else? Yeah.
I was just thinking that as you have a specific end and you're creating this urgency, it's like you're creating these a bunch of stories rather than in the reading it was contrasting the cyclical and the arrow method, or time, but the story is like, yeah, it's
So like for example.
For example.
Those magic words.
Yeah, I know, right? Get. Well, I feel like I'm like I already had my peak, and my project is kind of slowing, like at a little bit of a lull.
Yeah.
But I have an end to create like a student activist organization at HDS. So that's like my end, is I can create a story.
Okay.
That.
What about like anything from the readings that illustrates Mark's point about the way in which it creates a narrative? Yeah.
I read the articles about the International Women's
Yeah.
Conferences, and I feel like the way that the campaign works with having kind of these planning conferences and pulling people together, and then bringing the NGOs together with the actual delegates, and then having the conference. It creates a narrative for how these things are going to go, like how you lead up to these UN conferences every time, so everyone kind of knows the drill at this point, that we're going to start with the planning conference, we're going to hold these advocacy meetings, and get to the conference.
Okay. Other, yeah.
I think the boycott was an example. Had several examples in the sense that you had this boycott that persisted, for several years, and seemed like throughout trying to be able to either gain leverage over the growers or being able to recruit more people. I mean, you could talk about sort of the experience you had in either in other towns, and you could talk about little successes you had, and in that sense, they were able to gain a lot of leverage with both their constituents and their opponents.
Yeah. Yeah, Aaron.
I just want to say, kind of building on what was said before about people being able to get involved, I think a campaign can give people a sense of ownership over the project as well, because they can see how they fit into the plan. And I think also of like Gandhi's Salt March and how like people as you would walk through could grab onto it, and it could be something that they feel like they own part of it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a deep affinity between marches and campaigns, in case you haven't noticed. Why would that be? Marches and campaigns, and narratives, and strategy. See, there's something it's like fractals. I mean, there's a way, this form, right? Peak, and so forth, accumulating strength and so forth. So that's the structure of a campaign. That's also the structure of a story, isn't it? Of a narrative, moments and then leading up to the sort of the big peak, and there's these various crises and so forth. That's also the structure of a march. Huh? March starts out, and then first town, and then there gets to be more people, and then the next town. And, this is a successful march, but it's successful. Be more town, and then everybody's looking forward to what the big climax is going to be at the end. There's a real symmetry in structure, and it's worth kind of sort of thinking about. Well, why is that? What's kind of underneath that they all should have this kind of similar rhythm to them? Yeah, Luis, did you?
Talking about the march, there's also an option of bringing march from different places and joining them together
Yeah.
to form a delta. When that happens, it's really striking because
Yeah.
you see all the people coming that way, all the
Yeah.
people coming this way, and when they meet, it's like something magical.
Yeah. No, in a strike we had in 1979, I guess it was, we had a march coming, the convergence was Salinas, California, the lettuce strike. And there was one that came from 100 miles to the south, and another one came from San Francisco. And then they met, and we had like 25,000 people in Salinas, which is sort of like the population of Salinas. Yeah. No, it's just what you were describing, and the meeting was so dramatic. It's like, the coming together and the exchanging of banners and all this sort of stuff. It's very, very powerful. But it's an enactment. It isn't just a march. It's a story that's being enacted too, isn't it? It's like we started over here and we went from this place and we overcame this problem and we ran out of food there and then this happened and all that's happened. So there's a kind of a motivational dimension. It's like every town you come to. I mean, we used to have this standard routine. You come edge of town, there'd be some people out there to welcome the group, and then a mariachi would lead a march right through all the neighborhoods, and then it would wind up with food.
Creates competition. Which march is bigger?
Yeah.
So no, why has it?
So there's a whole motivational dimension to this, right? But isn't there also a strategic dimension to it? We're thinking about strategy and motivation, we're thinking about heart and also resources. What's the strategic dimension? Why are campaigns so strategically useful? What can you do at the end you can't do at the beginning? You got a lot more resources over here, don't you? In other words, it's a way to accumulate resources. Not just to motivate the spirit, which it is, but it's also a way to accumulate more and more resources, more people, more publicity, more money, more whatever it is, so that you can do things here that you couldn't possibly do over here. See, that's what's different. It's so different from like a program. We're going to initiate our program and then we're going to maintain our program, and that's like all about continuity. But like Gould says, like Stephen Jay Gould says, this is a rhythm of change. This is to wind up someplace different here than where you were here. And so you're both accumulating energy, you're accumulating motivation, you're accumulating resources, and the whole thing is like building up. So then what's a peak? What's the definition of a peak in a campaign? What's the definition of it? What makes a peak a peak? Wait, Mishka, Katya, wait a second. We're going to keep working here. We're getting a little better participation this time, but what makes a peak a peak? Yeah, good.
I think part of it would have to be something unexpected. Like in the example of the neighborhood organization in Boston, when Mayor Flynn just showed up at this meeting, and this meeting that was supposed to just get things started took on a meaning that people didn't expect it to have.
So then your understanding of a peak is what?
It's something that you're able to remember and draw on. For
Okay,
future.
so it's a kind of an emotional event.
Yeah.
Is that what a peak is in a campaign? What is the intentionality? Where's the intentionality? Yeah.
Because peak is where all of your resources are finally mobilized to get to that one point, and then you do it. It's there.
Yeah, I think it's important to think about a peak as a point of maximum mobilization of resources that you have at that time, at that moment. And you can't sustain it. Again, remember, we're always talking, there's less resources on the side of change than there are on the side of continuity. And you're always trying to figure out, how do we maximize our resources? How do we get the most out of what we've got? And so you can get, like, say, how many people were at the march on the other day, the immigration march here?
7,000.
Huh?
7.
So you could get 7? You think it's less? I think it's more.
I think it's more, because last time it was 7,500, and I think it's
This sounds like 10.
Okay, 7 to 10,000. You can get 7 to 10,000 in Boston. You get 500,000 in LA. You know, you can get huge numbers relative for a moment, for a short period of time. You can't sustain it.
Right.
And so the challenge is to figure out, how do we maximize this moment when we really can get all these numbers, or all this focus and concentration, to produce the results that we want to produce. Now, in political campaigns, you know what happens sometimes. You ever hear of candidates who peak before the election or peak after the election? Like 1968, Hubert Humphrey peaked 3 days after the election. Sorry, it's too late. Yeah, or they peaked too soon, and that's what that means. It's like they reached their maximum point of mobilization, but the timing wasn't right. And so they reached it too soon or too late. And so it didn't match with the moment of opportunity, which in that case is an election, right? And so while we think of peaks as emotionally meaningful events, which they ought to be, right? Because they're successes and all this sort of thing. The real deal is it's about mobilizing, maximizing your resources and thinking about the timing of that. So there is a whole motivational piece here. There's a way in which this is a story, but there's also a way in which it's a strategy. It's an enactment of a strategy, and in thinking about how you target and focus your mobilization, or your peak mobilization. So where's the relational dimension in a campaign? Yes. Over here? Like, what do you mean, for example?
that's when
Can everybody hear?
like geeking, that's when you really build your relationships so that you can, build your resources.
So how long is a foundation? How many people have, to what extent do the readings talk about building foundation? How many people have been involved in building what they think of as a foundation for launching a campaign? Well, how would you describe it? So how long is it? How do you know what it is, or when it starts, or when it ends? Yeah.
Well, I think it's a long time. The poster, it's like it'd be double, then it'd be the foundation. In terms of, over here somewhere. And I think that the more you invest in the foundation, the greater your outcome's going to be in your peak. Is because you have that strength and you're developing those resources that are deeper. That you're going to have people who are not going to just be here for the peak. They're going to be bringing a whole bunch of people who are going to be here for the peak, but they're going to keep on.
So how do you know when it's time for this? You keep building foundation and building foundation and building foundation, Aaron.
I was just going to say, it seems like intuitively to me that the part where it starts moving off the trajectory of the foundation would be like where the organizer comes in. That's just sort of how it seems in my mind. and the foundation would be the years of buzz and problems and people dealing with struggles, and like that would be sort of the organic part, and then the campaign starts when someone's like, okay, we need to do something about this.
So you'd say the campaign starts here, not over here.
Well, maybe, there's probably like a little bit of overlap, but.
Well, I mean, it might be different, but, for the demonstrations that are going on around the country right now on immigration, where would you say we are in that? Would you say, is that here, or is it here, or where is it? Is it a kickoff?
Yeah.
The peak one? Is it the peak?
No.
Probably not. I mean, what stimulated the organization? What stimulated the marches? What got them going? Huh? And who did the initial yeah?
Well, I actually think that they started organizing 1 or 2 years ago. To just knowing that these issues were coming up, and that they felt like there was a growing, maybe anti-immigrant sentiment.
Who's the they?
Well, I'm thinking about here in Boston, the Center for Immigrant and Massachusetts Immigrant and Refugee Advocacy Coalition, and I know that they were involved in some conversations with groups in LA, like at least a year ago, and decided, look, we're going to have to do something, we're going to do it in this time of year. So it was at least a year.
Yeah. So you would describe that as what
That's
kind
the foundation.
That was foundational work.
Right.
And you could probably take it back even further, and I know like SCIU's been involved for a long time. I mean, see, who organized the march of 500,000 people in LA? Do we know? Huh? What?
I heard it was Cardinal Mahoney who spread to the church.
Well, the church was part of it, probably. The unions were a big part of it. There's been immigrant organizing going on in LA intensively for the last, 10 years. So I mean, it's sort of different in different circumstances, right? When Greater Boston Interfaith got started here in Boston, there was I'd say about 2 years of just foundation building before the first event that they had. There was like 2 years of one-on-one meetings, basically, mainly with one organizer, going around and having meetings with lots of church people and so forth, and sort of laying a foundation. I mean, it's also true, like if you have 50 organizers, it's very different than if you have one, right? So the point is, it's not like a hard and fast thing, but clearly you have to have some ground from which to start, right? And you can jump into something too soon, or you can stay forever not ever getting started. But there is that piece of it that sets a ground for what comes after. Yeah, Mary.
I was going to say that I think foundation can definitely be a different length of time, because I think for some of us, we have projects that are campaigns within campaigns.
Yeah.
So like the larger campaign, in my case, is years and years and years of foundation, but for my part of the campaign, I think our foundation was a couple of months.
Right.
So I think it depends on the scope of the campaign and what your ultimate goal is. If your ultimate goal is a smaller goal, foundation might not be as long, and then the relationship building will continue throughout the whole thing.
Yeah.
But the building of trust and building of a team is what I think happens during foundation.
You're over here. So this is like it's sort of like gathering the resources you need to launch something. And it may vary, but there's certainly a relational dimension to this, right? And there's probably a motivational dimension, no question about that. You got to be ready to go, right? So then, yeah.
I'm still not sure when you know when to kick off, when you have enough power to begin.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, along with that, is kickoff the point where it's not the organizer doing it, it's the people doing it?
Right. So what's a kickoff? Who's had a kickoff? Who's been in a kickoff? One kickoff? Huh?
I'm putting Aaron, we should talk about it.
Are you working on a kickoff?
Yeah, it's kind of outside this class, but it's for the Boston Faith and Justice Network. We're having a kickoff on June 10th.
And so what does it mean for you?
What does it mean? Well, I think it's the first time that we kind of publicly, like we've been building relationships and forming a leadership team over the last year, but it's the first time that we publicly say this is the story that we want to tell and this is the issue that we want to address. And we know, we kind of know more of our story and the story. We feel like we can communicate that more effectively. So it's in a sense going more public in the sense of getting the word out more.
So let's just look at what's the relational dimension of what you're doing.
The relational dimension?
Yeah.
Well, to get to the kickoff, we're having like house meetings And so what we're doing is the people who are on the leadership team are all holding house meetings, and a few other people who have been to our smaller events are holding house meetings, and they're asking for people that come to those to come to the event and invite friends. And so that's the main relational part, and then there's one-on-ones that are going on.
Do you have a goal for how many people will make a successful kickoff?
150 to 200.
Okay. Good. Okay.
So,
And now what about the motivational piece?
as far as motivating
The
people to
kickoff,
come
yeah.
or to,
Well, so we're looking at it from different dimensions, right? There's a relational element.
Mm-hmm.
Now let's flip over, look at the motivational element. Where's the motivational element in the kickoff?
well, I think one of the motivations is that people from like churches all across the city are going to come together. Maybe people that haven't met each other across denominational lines,
How will they know that at the kickoff?
because they won't know each other.
So they'll just be anonymous people?
Be anonymous people, or what do
Well,
you-
I mean, how will they know that they're from different places just because they don't know each other? How can you make
Are you
visible?
gonna recognize them?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
How can you make it visible? Huh?
Well, I'm thinking back to the GBIO kickoff for the
Yeah.
healthcare campaign where everybody had signs.
Yeah.
And they're like, they sat with their different groups and stuff.
Yeah, what's the point of those signs? I mean, so it's so a group can look at
Identification.
itself and sort of see, oh,
Yeah.
God, look, they're from there, they're here, it's like, it's part of, that's a big part of it's like a celebration of the whole.
Mm-hmm.
And then you feel part of the whole. And that's a powerful motivational piece. But what else, motivational piece?
I'm having a hard time understanding if you mean motivational to come or motivation to be involved in the campaign, to commit to being.
Well, just the motivational thrust of the kickoff. In other words, what motivational events, juice, what's going to happen there that's going to be powerfully motivational?
Well, I think.
I mean, having a lot of people in a room can be motivational. No,
Yeah.
seriously.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of events that's their success. It's just a lot of people came.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I think what's going to be motivational of that is that one, there's going to probably be a lot of like young adults there that have a lot of energy, and then I think as far as the issue and what we're talking about, what's going to be motivational is that a lot of the people that are involved are people that have been involved in more conservative churches that haven't taken issues of social justice that seriously. Like they're not hearing it from like the pulpit, but they're really concerned about these issues.
Yeah.
And so I think what's going to be motivational about them is that they feel like they can put their faith into practice on issues of poverty. And so I think some people have been wanting to do that, and now they're finding an avenue to express that.
you going to have a story?
Hmm?
You going to have a story? You going to tell a story?
I hope so.
Well, I mean, what would it be? I mean, we talked a lot about storytelling and telling stories.
Yeah.
What would be the significance of the kickoff with respect to storytelling?
For you want me to keep talking to this?
Yeah.
Well,
Anybody else can.
You're looking around,
We're
so
just using his example.
Well, I think I'll say one more thing and then I'll
Yeah, then Mike over here.
open it up. I'm going to be talking a little bit about it, so I'll bring my own story in there, and then we're also having a guy named Bart Campolo speak at the kickoff, who is somebody who has grown up in the evangelical tradition, who has started an organization that brings like young adults in the inner city to live for a year, kind of like a Christian AmeriCorps thing.
Yeah.
And so he's going to be speaking about how maybe he didn't grow up in a tradition that took these issues seriously, but that how he has come to take these issues seriously as he's grown in his faith.
Okay, so you got a couple of testimonies.
Yeah.
What's the story outcome? Mike, were you going to say about story in this?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
At our campaign, we had a kickoff in February.
Yeah.
Where we brought, basically like, it was our campaign, Hotel Workers Rising, so we had workers from different hotels come in at the event and actually tell their different stories.
Yeah.
And so when everyone, just had people from different hotels
Yeah.
on the stage at one time, each one telling their different story. We had Danny Glover there, Senator John Edwards, and the event, we planned for 500 people, but I think like 750,000. The hotel wouldn't let us in anymore, so we had like a crap load of people outside. But because of that, we had people, actually coming outside to tell a story, and coming outside, Danny Glover and Edwards coming outside as well.
So what's the narrative? Let's put it this way: what's the narrative goal of a kickoff? Then what do you want to accomplish at that kickoff in terms of narrative, in terms of story? Yeah, Aaron?
It seems, I keep saying that like it's the point would be to show like this is where we started and this is what we've done so far. Like this is our foundation, and then this is where we want to go,
Okay.
and we all have to work together to get there. So let's go.
Well,
it's
and
like
so-
giving a vision.
Okay, yeah,
I think it's also to let the people know that we did this and you can do this too.
okay, so there's a lot of that, yeah.
I think it's also the chance to create that group narrative so that everyone walks away
Yeah.
with the comments.
See, I think this is the heart of the matter. I think all these things are true. But see, what it's the opportunity to make out of many individual stories a story. And it's often the first time there's a public telling of the story all together. And to me, the power of that event is all those individuals are now part of this group. Now there's an us. Now there's a we. We have come from these disparate places. Now we have gathered together. And this day, we become a we. No, we don't say that way exactly. But this day, now we go forward together to whatever it is that's going to happen afterwards. And so it's a critical moment of interpretation and of storytelling. So there's this relational piece of gathering people. Then there's this interpretive piece of bringing those individual narratives into a shared narrative, a shared story that then begins to unfold in the course of the campaign, right? That becomes a future story. Remember, story of hope, future stories, all that sort of thing. Then what's the strategic piece of a kickoff? What would be the strategic objective? You see what I'm doing? I'm going back through the different pieces and sort of how they come together here. So what would be the strategic considerations? Yeah.
How to amass the amount of, are we referring to the march themselves and getting comments started on how to amass the amount of people that we want? Who were the key nonprofits or organizations that we need to get in touch with,
Yeah.
make out with, organize, like where the buses are going to pick people up, you know, and who needs childcare if they can bring their children or if they can't, all these little details.
Oh, well, there's a lot of logistics involved. But like, what do you want to accomplish strategically with the kickoff?
Get as many organizations going together.
If that's your goal.
If that,
So like, for example, do you have a strategic goal for your kickoff? Is it just to get a whole lot of people?
No, it's actually to kick off a summer of service projects that are going on, but also to kick off to begin addressing the specific issue that we as a group are going to be addressing, one or two issues, such as like youth violence or something.
Okay, so there's a couple of things, but
Yes.
do you care who comes?
Yeah, of course we do.
I mean, do you want them all to come from one church? Where do you want them to come from?
Well, we're hoping, one of our jokes has been, if we're going to start a movement to overcome poverty, you probably better have poor people involved. It's kind of like trying to start a civil rights movement without having black people.
Now, is that for strategic reasons or is that for moral reasons?
Both.
Huh?
Both.
Okay,
I mean-
all right. But you see why I'm asking, in other words, who you get to the kickoff, that's a strategic choice. I mean, it could be like, oh, just a bunch of people. Or you say, geez, the way we want to build this thing, we were talking, Zena, about your project, right? The way we want to build this thing, do we want to get everybody from one province? Or does it matter if we get people from all 9 provinces, right, in the Episcopal Church? I mean, yeah, it matters if you're thinking ahead and thinking strategically about how you want to build the thing. So see, there's a storytelling dimension, but there's also a strategy dimension, and it's also the point when you sort of reveal your strategy, right? Hey, you all came here together. Isn't that terrific? Well, have a good day. What do people expect from this kind of an event?
Direction?
Yeah, what are we going to do? What's the plan? Where do we go from here? That's where a lot of them fall dead, too. It's when they don't have... See, we used to think of our campaigns, we'd have, okay, there's a story and there's a strategy, but the strategy was also part of the story. Like, you know, we started a month ago with nobody, and now here we are, there's 5,000 of us, and, you know, we have X number of people that we need to contact by X time, and so if everyone does X, Y, Z, then on this date we're going to be here, and then we're going to be there, and then we're going to get the X number of votes needed, and we're going to win the, you know, whatever. But, I mean, there's a kind of a motivational plan that often gets articulated here at a kickoff where people begin to be able not just to experience that they're part of this mass of people, but that this thing is going somewhere. And so in a way, a kickoff is a deadline for having enough of a strategy figured out that you're capable of articulating it. Otherwise, you just get a bunch of people there and everybody says, oh, this is a good thing, and then they go home, and you sort of wasted the opportunity. Yeah.
We did a bunch of kickoffs where at the end of the kickoff we gave the people a video and toolkit and everything very well prepared. But after 2 years, one of the people from the province told us that every time we did a kickoff, we gave everything. So we needed to involve more the provinces. So we did a kickoff where we didn't give anything.
Yeah.
And the energy just went down because we didn't handle the people the plan. So people started saying, well, where is the plan? Where's the plan? No, the plan is that you are going to provide us with the information.
Yeah.
But we didn't bring a plan so they can do that.
Yeah.
And at the end, the energy came down. So you have to be very careful that you have to give something in that moment so the people can then start going on.
Well, in the Dean campaign, New Hampshire, the culmination of the House meeting drive, the first part of the House meeting drive, were like organizing conventions, okay, which were sort of kickoffs in a way. And there the deal was sort of an overall plan, but then broke down into areas where people worked on their own plans within the overall plan, so that people left knowing kind of where they fit into the whole big picture. You know, it's, but yeah, I mean, you can't just not have, no, yeah, we all just came, but so where do we go from here now? So there's a strategic piece, a motivational piece, a relational piece. What's the action piece? What kind of action could happen at a kickoff? As we've been using the term action, action is strategy incarnate. We've been talking about. No, sorry, that's sort of a joke, but yes.
Formation of a commitment.
Like
Agreeing to sign onto an email list or agreeing to sign onto one of like 3 task groups or something.
Yeah, got to be something like that. Sign up, take a vote, decide to adopt something. You know, the culmination of the rally I was talking about in Salinas in 1979, the culmination was a strike vote to sort of strike everything in sight. You know, very, very dramatic. But see, then there's a sense, we not just gathered, we didn't just hear, we didn't just participate, but we actually did something happened here. Something different happened here. Now, I don't know if they had this in the immigration rallies or not, but it's also sort of a question, because then that's your opportunity to gather in resources through the action and move forward. Does this make sense, how this comes together? Mm-hmm. Any questions, thoughts about this kickoff piece? You get an idea why they have a kickoff? I mean, the other thing is, like, you have to have a way to separate campaign time from non-campaign time. Because what happens during a campaign? What's demanded of you? Huh?
Everything.
Yeah, it's a different deal. I mean, and you know, we used to have this in the farm workers. We had this discussion. Well, gee, can you organize without campaigns, where you could just kind of, you know, regular 9 to 5, and you know, and just, and that was always the dream. Oh, someday we'll figure out how to do that. And you're shaking your head now, like, why not? Well, but why? Why? There's a reason, I think. Yeah. Or Ann, we haven't heard from you.
I was just going to say, you have to be quick to respond. You have to be able to go on your feet and respond to urgent situations and mobilize whenever is needed. Not
And that's
just when it's
certainly one
convenient.
reason. I think that's a very important reason. Why else? Yeah, Aaron?
Because it's like extracurricular, and if you think of curricular as like the 9 to 5 jobs everyone's working at, well, we hope, but like, it is something people do outside of their normal day work, so you can't organize them when they're at work, so.
Okay, and why else? What else is it? Yeah.
I think it's also energy. Without the same thing applies to an organizer, I think, where if you don't have a beginning and an end, you can't sustain that energy forever.
Yeah. It's so important to get that. You know, you just can't operate at a constant level if you're doing change work. But there are times when you have to. And there are times when you should not. I mean, and that's part of the rhythm here, is about building up and then you stop. You take a deep breath, you go to the seashore or whatever. I mean, no, but it's like, because otherwise you can't keep doing this. On the other hand, I've never found anybody come up with a way to not do this. See, and again, I think it goes back to the logic of resources. I think it goes back to the logic of you know, status quo always has a preponderance of institutional resources. The way things are have momentum, and they just sustain themselves. They have inertia, rather. They just sustain themselves. And if you're trying to challenge that, shift that, you have to come up with a way to channel energy and focus what you've got so you can use it strategically and use it in a focused, almost think of it like a blowtorch. You know, it's like focusing the energy and the heat in such a way that you're able to get enough leverage that you can begin to move it and change it and begin to build some momentum. And then something happens. And then you stop and then, this make sense? Yeah, somebody had a comment over here. Was it?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I was
please.
just going to say, I mean, if you're focused on a specific outcome, I mean, it's kind of what you just said, then I can't imagine any other way of, you know, you have to then focus on that outcome, and then there'll be a time when either you get the outcome or you don't for a specific reason, and then that's the end. And then you go, you know, it's kind of a cycle, but within that, it's building. That's how I think.
Yeah, no, but have you ever been involved in any of these so-called campaigns that have no beginnings and no ends? Yeah. Like, what's an example of one? You just,
Well, in my last job was, it took over 9 months, and we wanted to improve the public transportation system in the city of LA.
yeah,
But we didn't have specific phases, like specific times where we're gonna finish this survey by this time, we're gonna get these many people out, this many people by this date.
Yeah.
But it kept switching, and the community kept switching because the case was taken over, and it just felt like it was never gonna end.
yeah. I mean, there's stuff like, or the Fair Trade Coffee campaign we got into, you know, it's like a perpetual campaign. It's kind of like, oh, it's just going on, going on. I mean, but that's not a I don't know how to describe that. To turn it into a campaign, you have to give it a what? A deadline, which means an outcome, which means you got to commit to something, which means that you've got to actually be accountable for making something happen. And I think that's one of the reasons why they don't turn into campaigns. Or they call themselves campaigns, but they just sort of dribble on and on and on, and nothing ever comes out of it. You can understand them as expressive politics, but not strategic politics. In other words, you can understand it as a moral statement that I'm not going to drink this kind of coffee or something. But it's hard to understand it as political or strategic in the sense that it's actually intended to shift power in some way, because you can't do it without real outcomes. So, yes?
Like, we're talking about the immigration thing, and we kind of laid the foundation and said what maybe the kickoff was. But A, what do you think the peak would be? And B, what happens when there's not a peak?
What do you mean?
Like, for the whole immigration thing, like, the theme was, today we march, tomorrow we vote. So is the peak that at the next election people are going to get elected that are pro-immigrant rights? Or is it that, you know, a good bill is going to get passed? And what if it's like neither one of those, and it's just kind of, it's this momentum that doesn't have a peak?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, especially on something so massive and such a scale. You know, I mean, the closest thing I can, like out of my experience is that, like the farm workers is different because we had a single organization and we could sort of decide. And, you know, you could take advantage of opportunities. I mean, every spring we had to start the Great Boycott all over again because, you know, it was like over the winter people would forget. And so we'd always have to have a new kickoff every spring. And it was just, you know, like, oh, how are we going to do it this year? Okay, well, but then you'd get it launched again. But where you have a multiplicity of groups and organizations and so forth, it's tough. In the civil rights movement, there was kind of a loose coordination among civil rights organizations. But there was, and over the years, people worked together and developed more strategic capacity. But then, like things like Birmingham or Selma would become focal points. And like Selma, for example, became a major focal point around which all kinds of mobilization was focused and coupled to a specific legislative outcome, which was the Voting Rights Act. And that was only possible because of years and years of this, I think. In other words, it was possible for the groups to sort of converge on a strategic agenda and sort of use the momentum built there to produce that outcome. Now, that's a lot of creative work. Sorry. Just changed history. Yeah. Who said we're not sensitive? Oh, this is not.
together.
Help here.
Then, yeah, thanks.
Some
We
help
have to talk
sustaining
about
the peak
organizers
here.
and strong.
Thank you.
And then you have to do some fixing the.
I think that's a great question, and this immigration thing is going to be an ongoing deal. But you know, you sort of think, like on a statewide level, you could conceive a campaign that's intended to focus on a particular piece of legislation. You know, you mobilize around that, get that passed. So I mean, I think it's sort of like, I keep getting drawn to musical metaphors in this stuff because I think it is like music, because it occurs over time, just like a musical composition. And lots of stuff is going on simultaneously, just like in a symphony or in a piece of music. It's not like one thing crowds the other out. So sort of how you orchestrate things really sort of matters. And so you may have like small movements within a bigger movement. You have mini campaigns within larger campaigns. And occasionally, you're able to draw them together into a major focus. That happens sometimes around national elections, right? Moments of key opportunity. With us, it always happened around, you know, harvest season. You know, I mean, there was a seasonal dimension to what sort of drove the timing of things. Yeah.
I haven't experienced something where people reached the peak and then they lose everything because they got engaged in side battles or side activities that has nothing to do, or somehow it has nothing to do with the main goal or the main purpose. It relates to, but it has nothing to do directly with it. And then they end up losing until everything collapses.
So how do you deal, what are you speaking about specifically?
Keeping the peak, keeping the momentum of the peak.
Well, let's just skip from the kickoff to the peak here for a minute, to the peak, okay? So we have these little peaks, okay? And why is it little peaks? Why are they up and down and not just a straight line? Why? Why do they go like this instead of just? Yeah. Oh wait. Huh? Why?
Need to rest.
Yeah. It's like that's exactly what it is. It's like, well, we got to this level. We got 500 people to the meeting. Okay. Now our next deal is we're going to have 3 meetings with 500 people each in 3 different parts of the deal, right? So now we build to that. But the key is that each time, what changes each time if it's successful? Each time, what changes? What's different than before if it's successful? More. And that's not a given. See, you can wind up just blowing everything on here and be left, and then there's just like bodies strewn around the field. It's like there's nothing left. You know what I'm talking about? You know, you've been through the whole thing, and there's just nothing left. Well, that was not a very well-designed campaign, right? I mean, because they weren't thinking beyond that one moment, how to build in capacity to grow beyond it. And so, yeah, the theory is that each point along here, you arrive, you're accumulating. That's what momentum means, actually. I mean, you're accumulating more and more and more resources so that here you wind up at a point different than where you started over here. And if it's like an organization that's sponsoring a campaign, let's say the organization starts here and you want it to end over here somewhere, you know, in terms of how it's been built. But that means that you have to plan beyond the peak. In other words, you have to think beyond the peak. You have to be ready there with your baskets or whatever it is to gather all the whatever and put it to organizational purpose. And be very conscious at the peak, for example, who gets credit, right? You have the big peak, the big success. You know, 12 organizations have played a major role, and you diss all but one. Guess what's going to happen the next day? No, you see, you're going to have this problem. Or you haven't, in the way you built it, you haven't built it in such a way that you've been creating cooperation among the different elements that you're trying to bring together. You said, oh, we'll turn it over to Joe, and Joe will run it. So everybody's in their own little silos over there. Joe is doing his thing. The thing is over, but there's been no interdependency created. There's been no collaboration created. It's just the thing happened. So it's a lot of things going on at the same time. But I think that can often happen, that people come together, but somebody's got to be thinking about what comes after. Yeah.
I was thinking about what Jamie asked before, and I mean, it seems like this model of the campaign is also relative, like within the strategic pyramid. So, like maybe the peak for the movement yesterday was just to get people to show up.
Right.
Or that's also an example of a successful campaign, right? Where there is a peak in resolution. So, I mean, you can have maybe many attempts at a campaign and only 1 out of 4, like actually peaks and resolves.
But say more about what you meant here.
Because the process to achieve the smaller goals that lead to the bigger goal require sort of the same strategy and outcome and deadline and momentum. So the peak is only defined by what you want to accomplish in that moment.
So say for this round of immigration demonstrations, let's say yesterday was the peak.
Because or if the goal was to have, multiple cities in the United States
Have demonstrations on X
Yeah.
day.
accumulating a mass of people at the same
Okay.
time in the same day, then we did that.
I wonder what this part is. I wonder what's happening here.
More planning.
See, because what you would hope is that then there would be somewhere people sort of debriefing what happened and saying, well, what happened here in Boston? And what can we learn from what happened? And let's evaluate. Let's do pluses and deltas, right, on what happened at the demonstration. No, seriously. And someone would be gathering to do that work. They would celebrate. They would appreciate each other and what they made happen and the whole contribution that they did. But they would also evaluate and learn. And they would rest, and then they would figure out what comes next. Because see, this resolution period is really important. See, otherwise, again, so much of this is it's generating all this energy and then trying to capture as much as you can to build for the next thing, if that makes sense. And so it's a very dynamic kind of process. Yeah.
I would say that all the elements that are in the resolution piece should be used also in each peak. Because you need to evaluate every time you have a peak.
Exactly.
And see if it's going well or not. And even define if you need another kickoff within the campaign process.
So each of these is also a learning opportunity.
Yeah.
Right.
Every single one. See, that's the debriefing afterwards. What did we learn? What did we do well? What did we learn about our next one? That's another thing that's built into this structure, right? No, that's an excellent point. That's very, very important. And then, of course, here's what if you lose? What if you did your big mobilization, everything happened, and then the governor vetoes the health care bill, and the whole thing goes down the tubes? Then what do you do? Come to Harvard? You go back to school. That's good. That's great. That's for the IOP. That's the IOP over there also. That's what they did. No. There was, who was, yeah.
I think you have to regroup.
Huh?
I think you have to regroup.
So how do you do that? Yeah.
Well, I think you also have to celebrate, you have to admit the loss and celebrate what people did.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to really lose momentum and keep things going.
The saddest thing is that election night in the campaign headquarters where they lost, and the balloons are hanging down. You know what I'm talking about? The band is sort of like, and you got the scene, right? And it's just like, oh. Okay, but see, a lot of campaigns let that be the end of it. And so here's all these people worked hard, tried to do this thing, they put out all this effort, and then the memory of it is that scene I just described, right? So then what ought you to do if you're thinking about the future? You bring those people together, you celebrate people's contributions, you acknowledge the loss, you don't deny it, you have a kind of grieving process, really, which is what is involved, but you do it together. And so that it strengthens you. It doesn't weaken you, and then you move on. Lots of people think, oh, if you win, you celebrate, and if you lose, you don't celebrate. I think it's even more important to celebrate if you lose, because otherwise you have no way to sort of recapture the energy and move forward. Yes, Lisa?
Well, and I think last week we learned about those 3 questions. Does it solve the problem? Does it strengthen the organization? And does it build leaders or help individuals grow? And I think that's like in all those little that you should always be asking that, and even at a loss, you like owe it to the people, or you owe it to yourself and to the relationships that were built, regardless of the issue, that it's kind of the organization's hopefully bigger than the one specific campaign.
No, I mean, I think,
Ideally.
and why do you think one reason it often doesn't happen in political campaigns, in electoral campaigns?
Well, because it's so much about
Joe.
the woman or man that's
Yeah,
running.
or Mary or whatever.
Right.
It winds up so personalistic that there's no institutional interest in capturing all that energy and building, And it's a weird deal about our politics, because our politics is so entrepreneurial and non-institutional, then who cares? No, so the candidate takes off and goes to the beach or with his family or whatever, and that's kind of the end of it. Geez, all this resources have been built, and there's nobody grabbing it. So, but when there's like organizations involved, then organizations have a real interest in it, have a real stake in doing it. Yeah, Ben.
Well, I guess as a contrast to that, it was interesting to see how the Dean campaign transitioned into at least an attempt to create a forum for other candidates in the future. So like, I still get these emails from Democracy for America, and I'm still not sure exactly what they do, but they're trying to stick around.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how that fits into that model.
Well, it's an exception to the model. I mean, I'm not the model. I mean, it's an exception to the rule in politics that they actually try to sustain something. But it's very hard, because the sort of institutional, if we had a constituency-based party system, I mean constituency parties, like in England or Canada, where parties actually nominate candidates, then there would be an organization that would have a real stake in this. But we don't have that. And so it's sort of like here or there, or it's other organizations that take it upon themselves to do that kind of institutional work and to gather the resources generated by these campaigns and husband them and build them. Yes, Sean?
I had a question about celebrating at the resolution. So you've had a success and you've celebrated, but your idea, at least in the beginning, was that this would take on a life of its own going forward, and there'd be momentum for, a long time, we hope, and more things would happen. What happens at that point to make that happen? I mean, you've celebrated and you've had a victory, but you want more to continue.
Right.
How are you going to make that happen?
So how would you make that happen? Do you understand the question? Do you understand the question? Yeah.
I would think that you could find something else to work on in some way, because thinking about okay, mass equality started and they wanted same-sex marriage, but now there's and they got it and they won and they celebrated, but now there's so many other things that are fighting it. So it seems like even in electoral politics, in organizing, the battle is never over.
So you have to, yeah.
I think it's that cycle of relationship and the campaign, the relationship, the campaign, the reflection, the relationship.
Oh, yeah.
The campaign, the reflection.
You mean action, reflection,
Yeah, I know what you're saying.
planning?
Yeah, but you have to go back to the relationship,
Yeah.
I think. You have to
Yeah.
strengthen what you just said.
Mark, do we have you and then Mark David and Bruce?
So, but how do you do that on a mass level for a big movement? I mean, I can understand how that could happen for a citywide mayor race or whatever. But I mean, and then you regroup with your constituency and you figure out other city politics stuff to work on or city issues. But if Dean won, I'm just curious, what happens to the grassroots element of it? So what happens if you win? I guess is the other side of that.
Well, it depends. What happens in electoral politics if you win is usually everybody goes to work for the administration, and there's no more anything. That's usually what happens. I mean, no matter what people say is going to happen, that's usually what happens. And it's not because anybody's evil or bad. It's just there's no institutional interest in sustaining it. But now, if it's an organization that's doing it, if it's a union that's doing it, a community organization, a church, or something like that, well, it's a whole different kettle of fish then, right? I mean, because then you win, and then that creates more opportunity for the organization, and so there ought to be a period of regrouping and renewal and refreshment, and then you kind of figure out, well, what's our next deal? I mean, what's our next deal? But the thing about this rhythm is getting comfortable with the idea that it is episodic. It's not a continual kind of thing. And you may have an ongoing sort of program of some kind, at the base newsletters or something that just keep going, rain or shine. But outcomes, really making things happen, usually happens through this kind of a rhythm. Does that make sense? I mean, the other thing I just want to, Luis, I'm sorry, we had, Luis.
It's exactly the thing that you said, the rhythm of Mandela states it clearly. By the end of this failed campaign,
right?
They went from 5,000 to 100,000 people in the organization. The organization was stronger, and then they could build to the other stuff.
No, that's a great example. It's an excellent example. Excellent example. Lost the campaign, but won. Lost the campaign in terms of its policy objective, but won in terms of its organizational outcome. And see, that's the difference of the relationship of organization building and campaigns is really different than when you're just thinking campaigns. When you're just thinking advocacy campaigns. Because then it's like, this happens, it doesn't happen, but when you've coupled it with organizing, what happens is you've actually built power, whether you win or lose, because you've created more capacity. And so you're in a stronger position, win or lose, after that campaign, in a way you're not if it's not an organizing campaign, if it's just an advocacy campaign. That's an important distinction. I think it's a very important distinction. That's helpful. Luis?
Oh, there is a movie very beautiful called Alive. It's a movie of some rugby players, or Argentinian rugby players that strike in the Andes. So two of them try to move forward, and they reach a peak.
Yeah.
Thinking that they will find the ocean in the other side, but they couldn't find the ocean, so they went to another peak. And when they get to the third peak and they couldn't find the ocean, one of the guys almost died of hopelessness.
Yeah.
So the other guy said, well, let's try to get to the next mountain, but let's not reach the peak. Let's go circle down. So we don't finish at the peak, so we don't end up frustrating ourselves. And at the end, they were able to reach Chile, and to our friends here, they were able to survive.
This was Guillermo's part.
Yeah. So sometimes, maybe...
But I was in the peak, so I didn't see them. The guys were in.
But my point is, sometimes you can put the immigration law within one of these electoral things, but it doesn't have to be the peak. You can just put it in a way, in a lateral way, so you can keep on going. And use the momentum of the campaign, but don't go to the peak, because then you can, if the campaign loses, then you get all frustrated. So.
But I think it's also important to learn to handle loss. It's really important. It's really, really important. I know, but.
I think what's key is also like once you do reach that peak, whether it's you win or lose, like say if you win, like what is important to keep the motivation and the vision in mind, because usually behind an issue, whether it be like same-sex marriage, or whatever, like there's a vision behind the issue, a vision behind the candidate. So I think like pulling together, really pressing in that vision and keep going after win or loss.
Well, and again, it takes an organizational entity to do that. It takes organized people to do it. It won't just happen by itself. And so that's kind of why it's such an interplay between organization and campaign, and sort of how those dynamics work. And next week we're going to focus on the organizational piece. This we were focusing on the campaign piece. It's kind of like time and space, or it's kind of like how this stuff comes together over time, and then how this stuff comes together structurally in terms of organization. Okay, we have actually a little time. Okay. What worked today? What was good today? What was useful today? Yeah.
Good discussion. Everyone involved.
Yeah.
More people.
Good participation. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Come about key insights, key takeaways? What about stuff like that? What
Circle the mountain.
Huh?
And you had one.
Circle the mountain, okay. What else?
Don't start the march in the same place and end it up in the same place.
Avoid circling.
Avoid it.
Yeah, Lisa?
The idea that that little chart is like many times in itself is a key learning for me.
Oh, it's like nested, like,
Yeah.
they're all like, it is a fractal kind of structure.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like the same thing within, just like the strategy thing, yeah. What else? What else? Yep.
The importance of the kickoff at the right time. Not to be afraid of shooting.
What else? Gina?
If you couple organizing with campaigning, you build power.
Yeah. That's a good one, yeah.
To do each of those stages, foundation, kickoff, peaks, the peak, resolution, well, you have to have all the other pieces we've learned in class about relationality, strategizing, motivation.
Yeah, and Jorge made a very, very important point about the learning opportunity that each one creates. Exactly. What else? Yeah.
It was great that there's so much going on in the city, in the country, and then people in the class are involved with that. So that gave a lot of inspiration.
A lot of action. No, that's terrific. What else? Anything else? Yep.
The idea that the kickoff is an opportunity to build a shared narrative.
Shared story. Good. Yes.
The importance of the campaign structure to jolt the status quo.
Oh, yeah, good. Deltas, things we could do better, improvements?
2 minutes
We're 2 minutes over. I'm trying to avoid rushing in the middle and rushing in the end. All right, have a good one.
Postcards with me.